Channeled Manner, and I want to hear about you and the issues you care about. Look for me here every week in the press room, live on Searchlight's Facebook page. We ask a question and you give us your take, or you ask a question and we find the people who have the facts. It's time for real people, real stories, and real talk. Every Wednesday at 8 in the press room on Searchlight's Facebook page. Now, let's talk. Welcome to the press room and good night. I am your host, Shannon Monroe. Every Wednesday at 8, right here on Searchlight's Facebook page and YouTube channel, we discuss issues of national importance and how they affect the Vincentian public. Thank you for joining us. The Constitution of St Vincent and the Grenadines guarantees certain rights to citizens, including the protection of freedom of assembly and association. However, the Public Order Act states that no person has the right to have a meeting in a public place. How do we reconcile these two? What guidance can be given to groups who wish to hold public protests? And what are the limitations imposed on them by law? In our discussion this week, we'll be joined by Commissioner of Police Colin John, trade unionist and president of the Public Workers Union, Elroy Vulture, and lawyer Heidi Badnock. Remember to share the live stream and ask your questions in the comment section. We'll try to answer them during the final segment of the program. When we come back, we'll be joined by our panelists.
I got my COVID-19 vaccine and my booster shot to ensure that I am protected. I've never been tested positive for COVID-19, and even if I did contract the virus, I've never been sick. And I am confident that the COVID-19 vaccine significantly contributed to that. The vaccines are safe, they are effective, and they're one of the ways that we can navigate this pandemic together. If you've not yet considered vaccination or getting your booster shot, I encourage you to do so today. Get vaccinated.
Welcome back. We extend warm welcome to the press room to Commissioner of Police Colin John, President of the Public Workers Union Elroy Boucher, and lawyer Heidi Badnock. This is the second time on the press room for Heidi and Elroy. Commissioner, this is your first time with us. I hope it will not be your last. Welcome, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Heidi, yes.
Yeah, good night, and I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be given the opportunity to educate the public as regards this issue. I hope I'll do justice at the end of this program.
Thank you so much for joining, Commissioner. Heidi, help us set the context for tonight's discussion. What does the Constitution say in relation to the protection of freedoms associated with mass protests or demonstrations, and how do we reconcile this with the Public Order Act of 1951, which in Section 6 says no person has a right to hold a meeting in a public place?
All right, good night again to you, Channel, and to all the viewers out there. Let me start by saying this. Nowhere in the Constitution mention the words protest. Let's start there. Now, what we often refer to as the section that covers protest in the colloquial terms is section 11 of the Constitution, which offers the protection of freedom of assembly and association. So assembly, you can gather. It offers this protection, but it doesn't say where this protection is offered. We historically have thought it to mean that we can gather publicly or privately for whatever purpose that might be once it is not illegal. Now, my take on it generally is we treat the laws as Christians sometimes treat the Bible. We take peace, we read it, we ignore the rest that doesn't benefit us and doesn't carry our case. So, I say that to say, how do you reconcile that with Section 6 of the Public Order Act? Easily. Every constitutional freedom has exceptions. No right, no freedom is absolute. This is a discussion that we've been having over the past 2 years as it relates to the pandemic, mask wearing. We've all heard the arguments that it's my constitutional freedom to do this and freedom to do that, but no right is absolute. And our Constitution says what those exceptions are. So after we have the protection of the freedom of assembly and association, subsection 2, 11.2, says that nothing contained or done under any law shall be held to be in contravention of that protection once it is reasonably required in the interest of defense, public safety and public order, public morality, or public health. Now I'll stay there, because it mentions public order, and that would take us to the Public Order Act. Now, the Public Order Act, as you rightly said, on Section 6, there is no person has a right to hold a meeting in a public place. So that is an exception. It's an exception to the rule of a freedom of assembly and association. Of course, there's much more we can get into on that, and I intend to, but I don't want to start off with me alone talking. So I will go back to you, Shannon, and then leave the able gentleman to continue discussion for now.
Commissioner, is there anything you would like to add to this question?
I just want to fully endorse what Heidi has said. Just want to make a correction, though, to what you said earlier, Shannon. The Public Order Act is not 1951. Based on the record, its origin is 1951, but the current act is Chapter 396 of the Laws of St Vincent and the Grenadines, 2000, revised edition 2009. So what Heidi said, I'm very much in agreement with. And at this point, I really don't think I need to add anything to it. I think she was very clear, and I agree with her position. So I don't think at this point I really should add anything to it.
Okay. Heidi, as you just said in the beginning, that there no point in the act is there the word protest or protester. It refers to participants in public meetings or public processions. Now, these days, when groups want to speak out against what they perceive to be wrongdoings in society, they say they're holding a protest march or a protest action. Do you think the protests of today are what was envisaged in the Public Order Act, or can we read participant as equivalent to protester in today's language?
You know, surprisingly, the UK Public Order Act also carries the term procession. It's probably, I may be wrong, but it's probably a very Western North American term, protest, that we've come to embrace over the past couple of years. So I think procession covers any gathering of people that are moving in any particular direction in a public place. I believe the act says a procession even includes a funeral. So once you're on the public roads, you're out in public and you gathered moving, then that would be covered by the term procession. Whether or not this what we currently have today is what was envisaged back in 1951, probably not. In 1951, we were not an independent country, so it is quite unlikely. This act, like many others, needs revision. They need to apply, or they need to account for our current circumstances or current situations. And it most definitely, to me, needs updating, but I think it can cover the current protest.
Okay, thank you. Now, Commissioner, the Act says that persons concerned with organizing a public procession or public meeting shall notify the Commission at least 24 hours in advance. Is it really notification or a request for permission? And what are some of the factors you may take into consideration when you impose conditions on such gatherings?
Well, the Act speak of notification, and I would not want to stick to the Act. It speaks of notification and to do it at least 24 hours prior to the event. The things that we'll take into consideration, the issue of public order and public safety. Once the notification is given, the Commissioner of Police would examine the routes that the person is supposed to be taking, the events that is taking place around the time, and can determine what to do, give certain directive or certain prescription. Among the prescription can be to change the time, change the route, or even completely prohibit the procession. So these are things that we would have to take into consideration when deciding to permit, for want of a better word, a public meeting or a public procession.
Any further comments? Okay, we'll take a break now for advertisement, and when we come back, and we'll return in a short moment.
I got my COVID-19 vaccine and my booster shot to ensure that I am protected. I've never been tested positive for COVID-19, and even if I did contract the virus, I've never been sick. And I'm confident that the COVID-19 vaccine significantly contributed to that. The vaccines are safe, they are effective, and they're one of the ways that we can navigate this pandemic together. If you've not yet considered vaccination or getting your booster shot, I encourage you to do so today. Get vaccinated.
Welcome back. Now, Commissioner, the Act gives the police the power to disperse public meetings or processions. Could you outline some of the conditions or reasons why the decision will be taken to disperse a public meeting or procession?
Okay. First of all, I just want to backtrack a bit as regard the notification. The Act also states that they shall notify the Commissioner of Police, meaning that it is mandatory that you inform the Commissioner of Police. Albeit the Act didn't say how the notification should take place, but you shall inform the Commissioner of Police. As regard dispersing the procession or public meeting, factors that would take into consideration, as I said before, would be largely related to public order and public safety. So where there's likely to be a breach of the peace or likely to be some crime committed, or let's say there might be an event slated for Kingston and then the traffic would be severely disrupted. This can cause persons to be agitated and can cause persons to want to react in a negative way. The Commissioner of Police may prescribe that, okay, the protest not be held in Kingston on Friday at 2 p.m., but to be held at Annisville where the traffic is less. So these are things that we would consider when deciding to whether or not crowds should be dispersed or protest action or procession or public meeting should take place.
Okay. Now, if I organize or take part in a public meeting or public procession for which notification has not been given to the police, I can be charged with an offense. What are the maximum penalties associated with such an offense under the law, Commissioner?
The maximum penalty, let me just, I would prefer to quote from the act. I happen to be in my office, so I don't want to speak off the top of my head. So I'll just go to the act, section 18. Any person guilty of an offense under this act shall be liable to a fine of $2,500 and to imprisonment of 3 months. That's section 18 of the Public Order Act, chapter 396 of the laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, revised edition 2009.
Okay. Now, it also specifies certain times and distances from public buildings within which public meetings and processions should not be held. This includes 200 yards from the House of Assembly when it is sitting. But over the years, it has become the practice to hold protests outside the House of Assembly, and the police have allowed them to take place. Recently, we have noticed that there has been a change in posture by the police. Could you explain the decision to enforce the law at this time?
Well, the purported or advertised peaceful protests appear to be less and less peaceful at this time. As a result of that, the police, we decide that we have to ensure that the law is adhered to. There are several laws on the books, and the resources for the police officers is limited. So sometimes we have to make a judgment call as to where to direct our energy. Unfortunately, we were not paying enough attention to the actions of protesters, procession, public meetings, whatever label you want to put on it. But because of certain development, because as we said before, the procession, the public meetings, the protests, they are becoming more and more violent. We have decided that no, we cannot exercise that level of tolerance anymore, and we have to ensure that persons adhere to the laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, including the Public Order Act.
Okay. Now, Mr. Vulture, what has the experience of your union, being of your union, in relation to staging public meetings and processions? Do you, as required, notify the police, and what is usually their response?
Police. But before we I answer that question, and maybe Heidi at some point can probably give a response to what I'm going to say at this particular time regarding another law, because I'm very familiar with the Public Order Act, thanks to Commissioner Colin John. The trade unions in St. Vincent are governed by the Trade Union Act. In addition to all the other laws, the Trade Union Act guarantees peaceful picketing and prevention of intimidation. It basically says it is legal for members of a trade union to picket in front of the workplace of whomever we want to address with a particular issue. The picketing can be in the form of or any other means of assembly. So, for example, if the politicians are meeting in Parliament, or the governing politicians, the cabinet members, the parliamentarians, Parliament is their place of work at times. If they are meeting in Parliament, the Trade Union Act says that the public service union or any trade union can picket in front of their workplace. Now, this Trade Union Act is 19, I think it's 19, it's prior to the Public Order Act. I think it's 1950, right? And I had raised this question on a previous occasion as to which one of the legislation takes precedence. Because the commissioner would have stated to us that the Public Order Act takes precedence, even though it comes after the Trade Union Act that gives trade unions the legal right to picket in front of the workplace or the place where anyone that they have a grievance with is residing or working. So perhaps at some time, the commissioner
Heidi, probably if you want to jump in and help and answer Mr. Vulture.
Well, let me jump in really quickly. I am in no way a scholar on the trade unions as I expect Mr. Vulture, given his years dealing with trade unions. But I don't necessarily think, and I stand corrected, of course, I don't necessarily believe that there's a conflict per se, because with everything you have to strike a balance. So even though the trade unions have a right to picket, I don't believe that any of the legislators would have envisioned that the picketing would be in such a manner as to cause public disorder. So I believe that, yes, it's possible that the commissioner may have to have notification of a protest, a picketing by trade unions if it is in a public place. And it's also possible that he has no right to deny them that because it is a right under that act. Of course, this seems right for courts. I know Mr. Bouch is familiar with the court system, so I don't understand why this has not yet gone before the High Court for decision. That way we won't be operating at the whims and fancies of anybody who's holding a particular office. We will have it directly from the court saying this is what will apply in whichever case.
Commissioner,
okay, yeah, I grasp this opportunity. Yeah. Section 31 of the Trade Union Act, Cap 216 of the Laws of St Vincent and Grenadines, 2009. It is captioned Peaceful Picketing and Prevention of Intimidation. It reads, notwithstanding anything contained in this act, it shall be lawful for one or more persons acting on their own behalf or on behalf of the trade union or of an individual employer or form contemplated for the furtherance of a trade dispute to attend as near a house, place where persons reside or work or carry out business or happen to be, if it is so, attended merely for the purpose of peacefully obtaining or communicating information of the peacefully persuading any person to work or abstain from work. So this, based on my interpretation, and I am not a judge, but based on my interpretation, deals primarily with issues dealing with trade dispute. The recent actions, as far as I am concerned, well, was not anything doing with trade dispute. We heard different reasons from persons want change of government to persons mandatory vaccination, all those things. Nothing in the recent protests mentioned anything about, well, in my opinion, was trade dispute. So the reading of Section 31 of the Trade Union Act, in my interpretation, deals primarily with trade dispute. So I don't know of any rights given to trade unionists to picket to protest willy-nilly on any issue anywhere in St. Vincent and the Grenadines without being challenged. So that's my take on it.
If I may make a quick response, there was a dispute. The government put forward and a draft SRNO. The government policies. The trade unions were in dispute with the government over its policies, which we.
Was it a trade dispute, Vulture?
What is a trade dispute?
Given the ordinary interpretation of trade dispute, was it a trade dispute?
What is the ordinary interpretation? In the trade union movement, any dispute between government or the employer and the union, whether it's on policy, whether it's on as it relates to law, or whether it relates to perhaps salaries or anything. Once there is a dispute,
it's a trade dispute, it automatically becomes a trade dispute.
It becomes, of course,
a trade dispute. What's the meaning of trade, Vulture?
In my understanding, and Heidi, you were here. In my understanding of what was meant when this law was done, it addresses disputes between trade unions and their employers. I'm not a lawyer, because sometimes you have language that is not interpreted literally as an ordinary person may interpret it. Okay, but from my understanding, from listening to what other legal persons have said, this refers to dispute between the employer and the trade union.
Okay. Now, Mr. Boucher, I just want to ask you, as a trade unionist and the president of the Public Service Union, just how important is civil disobedience in a democratic society and to your union?
Well, civil disobedience is extremely important, and I hope that as a trade union, we do not always have to use this particular strategy to address issues or differences in views or position with government or any other employer. But civil disobedience is extremely important. We assume that governments make just laws. We assume that governments make policies that are not injurious to workers or to its citizens. But that is not the case. In reality, that is not the case. Governments do make unjust laws, and government do put forward policies that are injurious to both workers and citizens alike. And in the case of laws that are unjust, it is absolutely necessary for citizens, not just trade unions alone, for citizens to engage in civil disobedience to ensure that there is not an erosion of democracy or their very rights. I'll say this to you. If there wasn't civil disobedience, the rights that have been achieved by Black Americans would not be there. Rosa Parks engaged in civil disobedience. Martin Luther King himself did. Gandhi did. I mean, a host of prominent and famous persons who fought for rights. You know, they achieved those rights by engaging in civil disobedience because the laws at that time were unjust laws, and they had to stand against those very laws. So it is important in our democracy for citizens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, inclusive of trade union as organizations, to engage at some point. You may have a thin line on whether it is a protest where you exercising your freedom. For example, the commissioner has a position with respect to the Public Order Act. There are many persons who think that his interpretation is erroneous or flawed. And therefore, they take the position that they have to stand in defiance, because if that is the interpretation, then it becomes an unjust law, because your right to protest is extremely important. In fact, the United Nations Covenant on Civil, I think it's civil and political covenant, the civil and political rights, that is a covenant that all members of the UN have to subject themselves to, because it is out of that human rights arm of the United Nations. And everyone who are member of the United Nations is bound by it. And when you go through that, they stress very seriously the need for governments to ensure the right to protest or the right to peaceful protest and assembly anywhere. And it must not willy-nilly be trampled upon. And that is what I've seen in St. Vincent, where the commissioner, in my view, have gone to the extent that you have used the Public Order Act to, what I would say, bring some unjust action against protesters. And I'm not talking about anything but peaceful protests. The trade unions have always engaged in peaceful protests, always. And it's not likely that we are going to get to the point where we're going to have violent protests. That is unlikely.
May I come in here, please?
Yes, you may, Commissioner.
Yeah, first of all, let me express my significant disappointment with Mr. Vulture. I would have hoped that as a leader of a supposed to be responsible organization, he would have said that he hoped that he never has to use civil disobedience. But he said that he hoped that he don't have to use it too often or something of that sort. This issue of civil disobedience, it can, and in most cases, result in the law being broken. And when the law is being broken, the police, as the enforcer of the law, we cannot stand idly by and allow mayhem to happen or continue to happen, and then anarchy, and then persons want to take the law into their own hands and a total breakdown. I don't know which planet Mr. Vulture was on, but some of the protest actions he said that were peaceful. I wouldn't really want to see. Well, and as commissioner, I would do all within my powers to ensure that it doesn't get back to that point, even beyond that point. While the law make provision for freedom of assembly and freedom of association, as Heidi said, there's limitation to it, and as police officers, we would ensure that while persons enjoy their freedom of assembly and freedom of association, that they do not infringe on other person's right. And whenever that occurs, we will ensure that we try as far as possible to gather the evidence and prosecute persons.
Thank you very much,
I want to
Commissioner.
jump in there quickly,
Yes,
Shannon,
Heidi.
because I am very pleased that these two gentlemen went down this road, because remember in the beginning I said that we treat the laws as Christians treat the Bible. We read peace and leave out peace.
Yes.
Well, here's a piece that I left out in the Constitution. So from the Constitution, so we have the right to freedom of to assemble and associate. There are exceptions to that right. However, so I'm going to read from section 11(2)(a) and then continue. Nothing contained in or done under the authority of any law shall be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of section 11 to the extent that the law in question makes provision that is reasonably required in the interests of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, or public health, and except so far as that provision, or as the case may be, the thing done under the authority thereof is shown not to be reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. So the question is, are the protections or the requirements under the Public Order Act, are those things reasonably justifiable in a democratic society? Is the ability of the commissioner of police to prevent protests, public processions, as the case may be, is that reasonably justifiable in a democratic society? And that goes back to your earlier question mentioned in the 1951 Act and whether or not it's applicable to us today. So the question is, and again, I throw this at Mr. Vulture. Mr. Vulture, I know that you are familiar with the High Court system. This is something that is right for court. Are these sections, this particular section under the Public Order Act, is it reasonably justifiable in democratic society? If you're saying for democracy there ought to be a right to protest, is the Commissioner of Police being able to take away that right? Is that reasonably justifiable in a democratic society? And I think I know what answer both of you will say. I'm leaving the ball in your court again.
Yeah. I suppose the court will eventually have to decide that, and I think I had even intimated that much to Commissioner sometime. But permit me to say this. When I speak about civil disobedience, Commissioner, I am saying unjust laws. Martin Luther King said, a man who breaks a law that his conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty by staying in jail to arouse the conscience of the community on the injustice of the law is at that moment expressing the highest respect of the law. We must never come to the point in St. Vincent and the Grenadines where unjust laws are passed and the citizenry sit back and do nothing. If we do that, we are re-entering what I will call slavery. We have been emancipated physically and mentally. People do not deliberately engage in civil disobedience unless it is the extreme. Trade unions would not go that direction unless it is the extreme. But it is extremely important that you must have that strategy, that tool available to you. Because if your rights to protest freely is being limited even in contravention of the United Nations Convention. What are we going to do in this country? And I am totally against violent protests. Not all of the protests were like that. The recent ones, I wasn't participating, I did not participate in them, but they were rather peaceful. Persons were arrested. I mean, the UN said, when you arrest people, you are trying to intimidate or stifle that expression. That is what they say. They say it is better to allow the demonstration or the protest, and then you take whatever, if you think the law has been reasonable, broken, then you address that aspect of it.
Mr. Vulture, I don't know who they use referring to, and I don't know what authority they have for
No, I'm
saying
talking
what,
about the United Nations
what you said.
Committee on International Human Rights, the UN.
Well, I don't know the
You talk
context
about
in
the
which
UN.
I don't
Yeah.
know the context in which you're quoting it, and I, in all respect to you, I'm not prepared to accept that as the position. For anyone can use anything. I'm not saying that what you're saying may not have some merit in it, but I do not know the source from which you're quoting, and at this moment I'm not prepared to accept that. What I can further say though is that, and Heidi can comment on it if she wish, that we based on our law, at most that would be persuasive. That's not binding on us. We have laws here, we have statutes here that state, in my opinion, what is permitted and what is not permitted. So that's the first thing that we would go to, or the first angle that we would use whenever trying to prove a matter in court. If there's some ambiguity or there's need for further clarity, they may go to other sources. But the Public Order Act speak expressly about there's no right to hold a public meeting. Section 6 clearly spelled out that. So the United Nations document that you brought there, we have to place it in context to our current laws. That's my take on it.
Okay, just 1 minute, just 1 minute. We need to take a break for advertisement. When we come back, we'll have messages from our sponsors, and we will return shortly.
Searchlight Online, now stronger and better, and with more options for everyone. Download the free app and access the e-paper and breaking news. Check out our e-papers read aloud and translation features. Read our e-paper in different formats, even when you are offline. Access our online archive as far back as 2005. Only interested in viewing ads? Go directly to our print ad marketplace. Subscribers get exclusive access to a full color midweek e-paper edition, in addition to the weekend edition. Affordable monthly, quarterly, biannual, and annual e-subscription plans. Book, submit, and pay for advertisements online. Go to www.searchlight.vc for more details. Searchlight, journalism you can trust. Now stronger, better, and with more options for everyone.
I got my COVID-19 vaccine and my booster shot to ensure that I am protected. I've never been tested positive for COVID-19, and even if I did contract the virus, I've never been sick. And I am confident that the COVID-19 vaccine significantly contributed to that. The vaccines are safe, they are effective, and they're one of the ways that we can navigate this pandemic together. If you've not yet considered vaccination or getting your booster shot, I encourage you to do so today. Get vaccinated.
Welcome back. Before we left for our break, we were engaged in a healthy discussion about the rights of not only unions but citizens of a country to engage in civil disobedience. Before we continue, I just have another question, right? The act which was passed in 1951, it was passed the same year we gained adult suffrage, one man, one vote in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. What is the historical context of the act? And panelists, do you think the act was passed to ensure that the authorities would always have control over mass gatherings, given that we were ushering in an era of political parties and so forth? Heidi, I would like you to jump in on that one if you can.
Well, I am by no means a historian, and I'm a bit young to be able to give you the exact historical context in which the act was passed. There's a strong possibility that they recognized the likelihood of there being political gatherings and mass gatherings that could become anything but peaceful. But on the other hand, we have to remember that this act does not relate only to political gatherings or trade unions, picketing, or anything of the sort. A carnival band cannot go on the road just like that. They have to have the permission of the police. Nobody could just hold a blockade just like that. Once you're in a public place, you have to meet certain requirements, because it's not just for one group of people to have a right over, let's say, 300 feet of road. It is for the citizens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's a public place, and we have to be able to protect persons in the public. And of course, the police has to be able to put in place guidelines, requirements for the behavior of people in public places. I started tonight's discussion by saying we have rights, but all our rights are not absolute. To coexist peacefully, these rights have to be able to be curbed in various manners. And we just need to remember that when we're having these discussions and we're thinking about what's happening in the US and all these types of things.
Commissioner.
Yes, I just want to endorse what Heidi said. The powers that be at the time, they may have envisaged some level of militancy, and they use this law to put some structure in place to ensure that order is maintained in society. So I believe that was the reason for bringing this law in force at that time that they did.
Mr. Vulture?
The law is, in principle, is necessary, but there are too many ambiguities and too many conflicting parts of it, even with other laws, because I would have, point to the Trade Union Act. Too many such exist. So there really is need for a revision of the law to bring it in line with our modern democracy or with modern times, or even in respect of some of the international conventions that St. Vincent have to adhere to. So there really is that need. And perhaps if that doesn't happen, then as Heidi would have suggested, then we may really need the court's intervention in making a pronouncement on the Public Order Act.
Mr. Vulture, at least we can agree on one thing for tonight. We can say we agree.
Glad to hear that. Now, it is the year 2022. We've seen, like Mr. Vulture said, the Black Lives Matter protests. We've seen protests in Paris, in London, all around the world. Does the panel feel that the Public Order Act is still relevant to modern times in the context of protest action or public procession or public procession and public meeting?
If I may go first, right? And
yes,
Colin was the commissioner was
Colin is good. Colin is good. We went to St. Martin together. Colin is
well,
good.
of course, I'm your friend, so you know. But I was quoting from the Human Rights Committee General comments on the right of peaceful assembly, and this was in 2020. And there's a reason why they took this decision to look at the Article 21 that speaks to freedom of assembly. There's a reason. That is because of what has been happening across the globe with the pandemic. Okay. So if you look in context with what is happening across the globe, clearly the Public Order Act is outdated and ought to be revised immediately. And it's quite interesting that it only takes a government, any government, to have a particular view with respect to that particular act, because previous governments did not go this far with this particular interpretation and try and curtail peaceful protests. Previous governments really did not do that. The only incident I can recall, I'm not a historian, was the 79 tear gas of teachers. So whether it was Labour government or NDP government, they did not go to curtail that right of peaceful assembly. It is happening now under this current government. So it tells me that the act itself is really outdated and have to be revised in such a way that it is clear that there can be no misinterpretation from governments to government regarding its application.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I would say that the act is still very relevant. The origin was in 1951. It is still the current laws of St. Vincent and Grenadines. It was not amended. It was not repealed. And this act is needed to ensure that law and order and public safety and security is maintained. We cannot have persons at their own discretion or their own whims and fancies do what they feel like, and for society to descend into anarchy and chaos. As regards a comment that Mr. Vulture made, we are not curtailing persons' freedom. As Commissioner of Police, all we are asking, you intend to have a public meeting or procession, abide by the law. Give us the notification at least 24 hours before. We would respond to you based on our intelligence, based on the information that we have at hand, and give certain directives. The law also states that when Parliament is sitting or when the High Court is sitting, you should not have a public meeting or procession within 200 yards of the High Court. Abide by that. The fact that it is happening 20 years ago and nobody saw it fit to enforce it doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't mean that it is right. If you go and park on a no parking sign in Kingston today and the police come and give you a ticket, you can't say, well, officer, I was parking there for the last month and nobody prosecuted me. The law is the law, and as officers, we have to enforce the law. So we are not in any way curtailing anyone's freedom. It is not what Colin John said. It is what the law says. And whenever I speak, I refer to the different section of the law that gives me authority to do what I do.
Thank you, Commissioner. Heidi?
I agree with both Mr. Vulture and Commissioner John. 1951, it's been a while. I personally believe that protests are reasonably justifiable actions in a democratic society. However, we have what we have and we have to make do with it until such time as either the legislators see it fit to change it or the court says that it is incompatible with the rights under Section 11 of the Constitution. I know Mr. Vulture said in the beginning that he will continue to abide with the law as the head of the Public Service Union. And I know Commissioner John has said he will fulfill his duties on the public order to any of that which the police force has to enforce or administer. So 1951, yes, it's been a while, but we have what we have and we make do with what we have until such time as it's changed.
Well, we have a few comments, questions from our panelists. Do we have an unfettered right to protest on government property? Heidi, I think you could feel this one.
I'm going to say it again. There is no absolute right to do anything anyway. So the answer is no.
Commissioner?
The answer is no.
Okay, now the law is man-made and therefore must be challenged and proven to be just. More importantly, it must be seen to be just and democratic. That's a comment we got from one of our viewers. Now, thank you so much. We've run out of time. Before we leave, we would like to ask each of our panelists to make one final comment. We'll start with Heidi.
Thank you again, Channel, for having me on the press room. Wonderful initiative. Thank you to these two gentlemen. I'm familiar with both. Have immense respect for both of them. And it was lovely participating on the panel with you too. So lovely to see you all. It's been a while. Protest. To me, it is needed in any democratic society. I think one of the fundamentals of any democratic society is to be able to demonstrate that you are either in support or for against any particular law, any circumstance that might affect you as an individual or as a collective. The way the law is written, there is ambiguity depending on which side of the fence you stand, but the court is always there and available to challenge any law, especially as it relates to constitutional challenges. Those matters would be fast-tracked. So within a year, perhaps if Mr. Vulture and his colleagues get on it now, within a year we would have a decision on whether or not the Public Order Act is indeed incompatible with the freedom guaranteed on the Constitution. I think it's important for us to recognize that in any democratic society, there must be order. We cannot exist or coexist peacefully in any society without order. Our rights that we have, none of them are unfettered. To exist, we have to fetter those rights that we have. So that is what I want to leave with the viewers tonight. None of our rights, no matter what they may be, they are not absolute. And that is why there are laws. Remember, when we read our laws, don't leave out the second part, like when we read our Bibles.
Okay, before we get other comments, Commissioner, I have a question for you from a viewer. I don't for a single section disagree with Boucher's position that a people have the right to protest, but is preventing protest within 200 feet of Parliament an unjust law?
Well, it is the current law. I am not the maker of the law. Parliament, the one who made the law, and the persons who feel aggrieved or disagree with it, they can go to the court and challenge it, or they can speak to their parliamentarian and get the law amended or repealed. But it is the current law of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and as police officers, we have to enforce it.
Okay, like many other laws on our books, it is not up to the COP to enforce the spirit of the law and not just the letter. Is it not up to the COP to enforce the spirit of the law and not just the letter? Is it not being done already with other laws?
Well, the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, that would be an interpretation in the court if it is challenged. Based on the interpretation of this law, and it is quite clear, I think it's a simple piece of legislation. It states what must be done, what discretion the Commissioner of Police has, and whenever the needs are right, then we deal with with those issues. I would really like this matter to go to court to give clarity to it as well, and it's something that well, I hope that protesters or persons involved in public meetings and public procession, that they do it in the manner prescribed by the law, so that it would prevent any direct intervention from the police in this case.
And Commissioner, now, could you make your final statement? We're finished with the questions. Those are the last two questions we got.
Okay, I'm glad for this opportunity. I hope that I did justice to the topic. I always welcome the opportunity to interact with the public, and this one gave me special opportunity to do that. The laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, including the Public Order Act, as police officers, we have to enforce the law. I may have my personal take on things, but the law is there to be enforced. I would want to agree with Heidi and say that there's certain aspect of the law that may need some revamping, but I think it's generally speaking, it is a good piece of legislation, and it's a piece of legislation that is in place to ensure that order is maintained in society and that persons can coexist in a state of safety, and that the country can operate in an orderly manner as opposed to chaos and anarchy. That is my take. And once again, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks again, Commissioner. Mr. Vulture, final comments?
Let me say this, the right of peaceful assembly is a hallmark of a functioning democracy. It is a means that groups, individuals use to express their dissatisfaction with what they may seem to be wrong in society. It addresses social issues, not just political issues. And therefore, it is important that that right be maintained and that there are not too many unjust opposition to people expressing that right. The UN Human Rights Committee stated, and I don't want our country to go in this direction, but it stated, failure to respect and ensure the right of peaceful assembly is typically a marker of repression. We do not want our country to go in that direction. So in striking a balance, the commissioner himself, I understand his position with the interpretation of the law as it is, based on how he sees it. So until a court pronounces on it, that is his interpretation versus the interpretation by many others. But he has to strike a balance, because we, of course, want law and order. We want a peaceful country, but we don't want our country to be seen in any way as a repressive one. And there is a fundamental reason why the United Nations at that level, that committee would make such a statement. There must be respect for the right of peaceful assembly. Not violent, peaceful.
Thank you so much to our panelists for agreeing to be on the show tonight. Thank you to our viewers. See you next week, same place, same time, here in the press room.
I got my COVID-19 vaccine and my booster shot to ensure that I am protected. I've never been tested positive for COVID-19, and even if I did contract the virus, I've never been sick. And I am confident that the COVID-19 vaccine significantly contributed to that. The vaccines are safe, they are effective, and they're one of the ways that we can navigate this pandemic together. If you've not yet considered vaccination or getting your booster shot, I encourage you to do so today. Get vaccinated.